When I saw my parents hand over the keys to a brand new BMW to my little sister while I was still driving my rusted-out Honda, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just anger this time, it was pure betrayal. I had spent years working part-time jobs, paying my own way through college, and trying to keep my head above water, while Samantha, my younger sister, seemed to float through life with everything handed to her on a silver platter. Let me take you through my story, and if it resonates, don't forget to show some love by liking and sharing it with someone who might understand. My name is Evelyn Evie Carver. I'm 25, and I've always felt like the invisible child in my family. Samantha, who's 21, was the golden one. She's beautiful, outgoing, and she knows exactly how to charm everyone around her. My parents, Thomas and Renee Carver, always made it clear they adored her. Any mistake Samantha made was forgiven immediately, while I was constantly reminded of how serious, or too sensitive, I was. The day Samantha got her BMW was like a punch to the gut. It was her college graduation, and my parents wanted to celebrate her success, or at least make everyone see how much they valued her. I stood there smiling, pretending to be happy for her, while my hands itched with frustration. I was barely keeping up with my rent and student loans. My Honda, which had more rust than paint, sat in the driveway next to her gleaming car. I could feel every glance from neighbors and friends, as if the contrast was meant to humiliate me. Growing up, this kind of favoritism had been normal. Samantha would get an allowance just for existing, while I worked since I was 15, juggling jobs and school. Scholarships and achievements of mine were barely noticed, but if Samantha got a B on a test, it was like winning a Nobel Prize. I learned to hide my resentment behind smiles, polite words, and nods, even when my stomach twisted with bitterness. That evening, at the small family party for Samantha, I tried to speak up about my struggles. My mom, in her usual tone, said, "Well, you chose a risky path, honey." Samantha laughed, teasing me about my part-time jobs, and my father shook his head as if I were being ridiculous. I felt invisible and unheard, a ghost in my own family. As I walked away from that dinner, my mind raced. I realized I couldn't keep letting them treat me like this. I was tired of being the forgotten one. For the first time, I felt a spark of determination. I wouldn't lash out in anger, but I knew something had to change. If my family wouldn't see my worth, I would have to show them, not with words, but with actions that they couldn't ignore. That night, I made a quiet promise to myself. One day, I would rise above their favoritism. I would make my own path, earn my own recognition, and prove that being overlooked didn't mean being powerless. This was just the beginning that I've always felt like I was living in someone else's shadow, and looking back, it started when I was a kid. By the time I was 15, I had taken on my first part-time job, juggling school and work just to help with small bills and save for college. Meanwhile, Samantha, my younger sister, got an allowance for doing absolutely nothing. Every weekend, she would come home with some new outfit or gadget my parents bought her, and I'd force a smile, pretending I wasn't jealous, pretending it didn't sting. Every little thing I achieved seemed to go unnoticed. Scholarships, honors in school, even a small business I started on the side. Nothing earned me more than a nod or a passing good job from my parents. But the moment Samantha got an A on a test or managed to bake a cake without burning it, suddenly it was a family celebration. They would gush over her and take pictures, as if the world should know what a star she was. Meanwhile, my achievements were quietly filed away, barely remembered. My father often told me I was too serious, as if my hard work and responsibility were flaws rather than strengths. My mother would sigh and say I wasn't the affectionate type, as if my quiet love and care for the family didn't count for anything. I tried to explain how hard I was working, how much I was sacrificing, but it was like speaking to a wall. Their words didn't hurt as much as their lack of recognition. The unfairness didn't stop at praise or attention. When Samantha crashed her first car, it was replaced immediately. The second time she had an accident, they paid for a brand new one again. Meanwhile, when my old Honda broke down, I had no choice but to take the bus for weeks until I could save enough from my own paycheck to get it fixed. I couldn't even complain without being reminded that I was responsible for my own mistakes. It was exhausting, feeling like I had to fight for every little thing I had while Samantha's every whim was granted. Even as a child, I noticed the patterns, the subtle favoritism that ran through every interaction. Family outings, holidays, birthdays, Samantha was the one celebrated. I learned to keep my feelings hidden, to smile when I felt hurt, because I didn't want to be labeled ungrateful or jealous. I learned that speaking up often made things worse, so I swallowed the unfairness and carried it silently. Those years shaped me, made me resilient in ways my sister would never need to be. I learned to rely on myself, to push forward even when it felt like no one cared. But it also left a quiet ache, a feeling of being invisible in my own home. Every little success I had was met with indifference, while Samantha's smallest victories became family milestones. And though I kept smiling deep down, I carried the weight of every unnoticed effort, every ignored struggle. That weight would later fuel the fire inside me, a determination to prove that being overlooked didn't mean being powerless. The night of Samantha's celebration felt suffocating from the moment I stepped into the dining room. My parents had gone all out, fancy decorations, a cake with her name in gold icing, and friends from work congratulating her on the amazing job opportunity my father had lined up through a connection. I tried to force a smile as everyone praised her, but inside, I felt a storm building. I had just lost a big graphic design contract, and rent was piling up. My savings were nearly gone, and yet here they were, treating Samantha like a queen while I barely existed in their eyes. Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I cleared my throat and started to talk about my struggles, explaining how hard it had been to keep afloat, the late nights, the bills, the constant stress. I thought maybe they would understand, maybe they'd see that I too deserved recognition. But my mother cut me off with a casual shrug. "Well, you chose a risky career, honey," she said, as if that explained everything. Samantha laughed at me, a sharp, dismissive laugh that made my blood boil. "You should have studied something useful," she said, smirking as if my failures were a source of entertainment. The people around the table murmured politely, but I could feel the sting of humiliation crawling over my skin. Every word felt like salt in an old wound, every glance a reminder that I had been invisible my entire life. Something inside me snapped. I slammed my fork down, my hands trembling, and I called out the hypocrisy, the blatant favoritism I had endured for years. I told them how Samantha's mistakes were excused while mine were magnified, how every small success of mine had been ignored. I reminded them that I had worked tirelessly, sacrificed so much, and yet their eyes never looked at me with pride or love. But, of course, they didn't hear me. My father waved his hand dismissively and muttered, "You're just jealous." My mother nodded, eyes avoiding mine. Samantha rolled her eyes and returned to sipping her champagne, completely unfazed. It was the same story, the same roles they had assigned me since I was a child. The serious, hard-working daughter who could never be celebrated, the forgotten one who was always too much or too serious. I couldn't stay there any longer. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor, and walked out of the dining room, out of the house, my fists clenched and my body trembling. The night air hit me, and I inhaled sharply, trying to calm the rage and hurt that threatened to consume me. As I sat on the curb outside, the sounds of laughter and celebration floating from the house behind me, I made a decision. Something had to change. I could no longer allow myself to be their doormat, the overlooked daughter who smiled politely while her family favored someone else. I would find a way to rise, to claim my worth, and to make them see that I was more than the invisible child in their home. That night marked the beginning of a plan, quiet, steady, and determined, to ensure that I would never again be ignored, and that one day, my life would speak louder than their favoritism ever could. After that night, I realized I needed distance. I stopped answering my parents' calls and texts, and I stopped showing up for family gatherings. At first, it felt strange and lonely, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't keep letting them dictate how I felt or define my worth. I needed to focus on myself, on building something that was mine, something that no one could take away or dismiss. I threw myself into my freelance design work with everything I had. Late nights became normal, sketching logos, redesigning websites, and learning new skills that would make me stand out. At first, it was slow. Clients were few, and the pay was barely enough to cover rent. But I refused to give up. Every small project was a step forward, every completed design a quiet victory. I reminded myself that this was my path, one I was building with my own hands, not through favors or family connections. Then, after months of persistence, a small local brand approached me for a rebranding project. It wasn't a huge company, but it was a start. I poured all my creativity into it, experimenting with colors, layouts, and logos in ways I had never dared before. When they saw the final product, they were thrilled. Word started spreading. My work was fresh, unique, and daring. Slowly, I started to get more clients, each one bigger than the last. My reputation as a talented designer began to grow. Meanwhile, I would occasionally hear updates about my family. Samantha had taken a vacation to Europe, flaunting her BMW on social media, while my parents continued to brag about her successes to friends and relatives. Normally, these updates would have stung, but now I felt a quiet calm. I no longer needed their approval. I didn't respond, I didn't comment. I just focused on building my own life. And as I built, I began to plan. Not revenge in the traditional sense of anger or confrontation, but revenge through success. Every design I created, every client I impressed, every milestone I reached would be a silent reminder to them of what they had overlooked. I envisioned a future where I would stand tall, independent, and respected, while the favoritism and neglect they had shown me would become obvious for all to see. I promised myself that when I rose, it wouldn't be loud or cruel, but undeniable. They would realize too late that all their attention and gifts had never mattered. Their pride in Samantha could never replace the satisfaction and fulfillment I was building with my own hands. Every time they had made me feel small, every moment I had been ignored, would be eclipsed by my success. I felt a sense of power I had never known before, not through anger, not through spite, but through determination, creativity, and independence. And that quiet power became my mission. This was my life, and I was finally taking control of it, step by step, project by project, until the day I would no longer be the invisible daughter. Months had passed since I began building my life on my own, and things were finally starting to look up. My business was growing, clients were contacting me regularly, and I felt a quiet confidence I hadn't known before. Then one afternoon my phone rang, and the name flashing on the screen made my stomach twist: Samantha. Her voice was high and cheerful, masking a hint of panic. "Evie, I need your help," she said. Their parents had insisted that I assist with customizing her BMW for a high-profile luxury event, something they framed as a family favor. I took a deep breath, pretending to consider it for a moment, before responding with my calmest, sweetest voice. "Of course, Sam. I'll make sure it looks amazing." Inside, though, a different plan was already forming. I agreed to help, but I wasn't just going to work quietly and let them continue to think I existed only to serve Samantha. No, this time I would make a point, subtle, clever, and unforgettable. I pored over sketches, designs, and patterns, making sure every line and curve was perfect on the surface. But in a hidden corner of the detailing, I etched a message only visible under certain lighting: Daddy's money. It was subtle, almost invisible to the naked eye, but under the bright lights of the luxury event, it would glow and reveal the truth. When the day of the event arrived, Samantha looked radiant as she pulled up in her polished BMW. Guests whispered, taking photos and complimenting her car, while my parents beamed with pride. I stayed at a distance, silently watching, my heart pounding with anticipation. The lights hit the car just right, and slowly, the hidden message began to glow across the glossy finish. Gasps echoed through the crowd. People whispered and pointed. Daddy's money, shining in bright lights, seemed to mock her, and the attention quickly shifted from admiration to shock. Samantha froze, eyes wide, her face draining of color. She sprinted from the car, her heels clicking against the floor as she screamed my name in disbelief and fury. The crowd turned to see what had caused the commotion, and murmurs of confusion spread like wildfire. My parents rushed forward, horrified, calling it an accident and blaming poor lighting or a manufacturing flaw. But I knew the truth. It wasn't an accident. This was the first spark of my quiet revenge, executed perfectly, without raising my own voice. I had exposed their favoritism and Samantha's reliance on their money in a way they couldn't ignore, all while appearing calm, polite, and helpful. As Samantha stormed off, I felt a rush of satisfaction that was difficult to describe. It wasn't cruelty that motivated me. It was justice, subtle and clever. I knew this was only the beginning. This was the moment I realized that success, patience, and a little creativity could speak louder than anger ever could. From here, everything would be different. I wasn't the overlooked daughter anymore. I was someone who could finally make them see, and they wouldn't forget it. After the BMW incident, my design work started getting noticed in ways I had only dreamed of. Social media picked up photos from the luxury event, and the subtle glow of that Daddy's money message caught the attention of industry insiders. People loved the creativity and boldness behind the work, and none of them knew I was the one responsible. Offers began pouring in, each one more exciting than the last. High-end brands, small businesses looking to make a mark, and even local celebrities reached out for collaborations. My freelance hustle had turned into something real, something that could no longer be ignored. I threw myself into every project with the same determination I had carried through years of being overlooked. Every logo, every design, every rebrand I completed showcased my creativity and professionalism. Slowly, I started building a reputation not just as a talented designer, but as someone fearless and innovative. Clients admired my eye for detail and the way I could transform even the simplest concept into something remarkable. I was finally proving to myself and the world that my work mattered. With the money I earned, I treated myself to a small but meaningful victory, a new car. Not a flashy BMW, not something that screamed status or family wealth, but a sleek, elegant hybrid I had chosen and paid for entirely on my own. Driving it for the first time, I felt an unexpected rush of pride. This wasn't just a car, it was independence, proof that I had built something real from nothing. It felt better than any gift my parents could have given me, better than any approval I had been denied. As my confidence grew, I started noticing the subtle shifts in my parents' behavior. Calls came more frequently, texts asking about my busy schedule, and exciting projects started showing up. And suddenly, they seemed genuinely interested in what I was doing. Invitations to family dinners were more insistent, accompanied by compliments that felt slightly forced. Samantha, too, acted differently. She would make veiled comments about my sudden success, or try to strike up conversations that I barely responded to. I stayed polite but kept my distance. I no longer needed their validation, and I wasn't going to fall back into the old patterns of seeking approval. For years, they had ignored my struggles and celebrated every little thing Samantha did. Now the tables were turning. They needed me now more than I ever needed them. And even though I didn't say it aloud, I relished the quiet satisfaction of that reversal. Driving home one evening in my hybrid, I reflected on everything that had brought me here. The invisible years, the favoritism, the constant struggle to be seen. It had all shaped me, strengthened me, and prepared me for this moment. I wasn't just rising above my parents' favoritism. I was building a life that was entirely my own. I was free from the chains of seeking approval and finally living on my terms. For the first time, I felt truly seen, not by my family, not because of their attention, but because of my own achievements. And that feeling was far more powerful than any recognition they could offer. The Thanksgiving table gleamed with candles and silverware, but beneath the soft lighting, every eye carried tension sharp enough to slice through the turkey. Evie sat across from her parents, her posture calm but her heart beating like a quiet drum. It had been months since she'd seen them. Months since the BMW incident. Months since Samantha's perfect world started to crumble. Samantha arrived late, her designer bag replaced with something far less flashy. Her once glowing confidence had dimmed, replaced by irritation that hung over her like a cloud. The moment she saw Evie, her lips tightened into a forced smile. "Didn't expect you to actually show up," she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for Evie to hear. Evie didn't respond. She simply smiled and focused on her plate. The silence between them was thick, only broken by the clinking of forks and the murmurs of distant relatives trying to make small talk. But everyone could feel it, the unspoken tension that had been building for years, now reaching its boiling point. When Aunt Carol leaned in and said, "Evie, I saw your interview online. Your designs are incredible. You must be so proud." The entire room turned to her. Evie felt her mother's gaze tighten, her father's expression stiffen, and Samantha's face twist in barely contained jealousy. "Oh, please," Samantha snapped suddenly, her fork clattering onto her plate. "Don't act like she's some self-made success story. She's been trying to make me look bad ever since we were kids." The table froze. Evie's father cleared his throat, but Samantha's voice only grew louder. "You all think she's innocent? She humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. Everyone saw that stupid prank, that daddy's money thing. She's obsessed with revenge." Evie slowly set down her drink. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice came out steady, quiet, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You humiliated yourself, Samantha. You were the golden child. You got the car, the praise, the attention. I just worked, and no one noticed until I stopped trying to please any of you." Her parents' faces paled. The words hung heavy in the air. Evie could see the guilt flicker in her mother's eyes, the regret forming in her father's furrowed brow. "For years," Evie continued softly, "you made me feel like I wasn't enough. You called my dreams silly. You watched me struggle and did nothing. But now? Now that I've made something of myself, you want to sit at my table again." No one spoke. Samantha pushed her chair back, tears of anger stinging her eyes. "You think you're better than us now?" Evie met her gaze. "No," she said quietly. "I just finally see my worth." As she stood to leave, the silence that followed was deafening, the sound of years of denial collapsing under the weight of truth. After the Thanksgiving dinner, silence filled the family group chat. No calls, no messages, just emptiness, the kind that comes after years of pretending everything was fine. Evie didn't miss it. For the first time in her life, she woke up without the weight of trying to earn their approval pressing on her chest. She had spoken her truth, and though it tore the family apart, it set her free. Samantha blocked her on every platform within days. Her last message had been venomous. "You ruined everything. I hope you're happy now." Evie read it once, then deleted it. She didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Samantha wasn't ready to face the truth, that her downfall wasn't Evie's doing, but her own arrogance and their parents' blind favoritism. Thomas and Renee tried to play peacemakers, but even their calls felt hollow. "You girls need to fix this," her mother pleaded one afternoon over the phone. "Family is everything." Evie had smiled faintly at the irony. "Family should have felt like everything when I needed you," she said gently, then ended the call. Days turned into weeks, and Evie threw herself into her work. Her name was starting to circulate in creative circles. That daring car design that had once embarrassed Samantha had made a quiet mark online. People admired the mystery artist behind the bold statement. New clients started coming in, intrigued by her originality and courage. She didn't correct them when they called her a visionary. Maybe at last she was. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through her tiny apartment window, Evie signed the lease papers for her new design studio, Yell Designs. She ran her fingers over the embossed lettering, feeling a rush of pride she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't a BMW funded by her parents' money. This was hers, built from late nights, unpaid gigs, and every tear she'd ever shed for feeling invisible. The new studio was small but bright, with tall windows and a view of the city skyline. Evie filled it with sketches, mood boards, and plants that thrived in sunlight. Every detail spoke of renewal. Every corner whispered freedom. When Thomas and Renee finally came to visit, they looked around in quiet awe. "You've really done well for yourself," her father said softly. There was regret in his tone, and pride too. Evie smiled politely. "I had to," she replied. "No one else was going to believe in me." They didn't argue. They just nodded, as if realizing too late what they'd lost. The daughter who had only ever wanted to be seen. As the door closed behind them, Evie sat at her desk, watching the city lights flicker on. Her phone buzzed with new orders, new clients, new beginnings. She didn't need an apology. Her success was her answer. Her peace was her quiet revenge. It was a gray afternoon when the bell over Evie's studio door chimed softly. She looked up from her desk, expecting a client, but instead she froze. Her mother, Renee, stood there clutching her handbag like a lifeline, her eyes red and swollen. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of rain against the glass filled the silence between them. "Evie," Renee whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't call because I didn't know if you'd answer. But I had to come." Evie set down her stylus pen and folded her hands in front of her. "You're here now," she said quietly. "What do you need, Mom?" Renee's lips quivered. "I need you to know that we didn't mean to hurt you. Your father and I, we thought we were doing what was best. Samantha she always needed more attention. You were strong. We assumed you didn't." Evie let out a soft breath, neither angry nor forgiving, just tired. She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "Sit if you want." Renee sat down hesitantly, glancing around the studio. The minimalist design, the framed awards, the quiet hum of creativity, it was all foreign to her. "You've built something amazing," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I'm so proud of you, Evie. Truly." Evie nodded but didn't smile. "It wasn't easy, but I had to stop waiting for approval that was never coming." Her mother wiped at her tears. "We just didn't realize how much you were hurting. We thought you were okay. You never said anything." Evie's jaw tightened. "Mom, I did. You just never listened. Every time I tried to talk about how I felt, you told me I was too sensitive, too serious. I stopped trying when I realized nothing I said would change how you saw me." Renee's tears spilled freely now. "I wish I could take it back. All of it." Evie looked at her, her gaze calm and distant. "I don't hate you," she said, her voice steady but heavy with truth. I just stopped waiting for you to love me the way you love her. The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to clear. Renee pressed a hand to her mouth, choking on a sob. She looked around the studio one last time, at the proof of her daughter's independence, her strength, her healing, and realized it had grown from pain she helped create. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "For everything." Evie gave a faint nod. "I know." Renee stood slowly, shoulders trembling, and walked to the door. She paused, as if hoping Evie would stop her, but Evie stayed seated, calm and still. The door opened with a soft creak, then closed gently behind her. For a long moment, Evie sat in silence. Then she turned back to her desk, where her latest project waited, a logo that read Rebirth Studio. She smiled faintly. Some apologies heal, others simply close a chapter. Hers had just ended. The late afternoon sun dipped low over the quiet Ohio suburb, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. Evie turned the steering wheel gently, her hybrid humming softly as she drove down the street she once dreaded, the one leading to her parents' house. She hadn't been here in months, not since her mother's visit to her studio. But today, she wasn't coming to talk or to forgive. She was just passing by. As she slowed at the familiar curve, something caught her eye. An old BMW sitting in the driveway, its once gleaming paint now dulled, the bumper scratched, one headlight cracked. Samantha's car. The same car that had once symbolized everything Evie wasn't: loved, spoiled, chosen. Now it looked tired, abandoned, forgotten. Evie let out a quiet laugh, not bitter, just knowing. It wasn't about revenge anymore. That car wasn't just metal and wheels, it was a memory, one she no longer carried with pain. She rolled down her window, letting the cool wind brush against her face, and whispered softly, "You can keep your BMW, Sam. I've got something better." She didn't mean the hybrid she was driving. She meant peace. At the stop sign near the end of the street, Evie paused. From a distance, she could see her parents through the living room window, Thomas reading a newspaper, Renee moving around the kitchen. They looked smaller somehow, like time had finally caught up to them. For a moment, she thought about all the years she spent trying to make them proud, trying to earn their love the way Samantha received it freely. But she didn't feel that ache anymore. It was gone, replaced by something steadier, warmer. Her phone buzzed with a message. A new client inquiry. She smiled. Her studio was thriving, her team growing, her name starting to appear in industry magazines. But what she loved most wasn't the recognition. It was the quiet mornings, the control over her life, the freedom to create without apology. Evie pressed the gas and turned onto the main road, leaving the neighborhood, and that old version of herself behind. The sky opened wide ahead of her, streaked with the colors of sunset. She thought about everything that had happened. The years of invisibility, the humiliation, the tears she cried when no one was watching. And yet here she was whole, strong, seen. She reached her studio just as the sun began to dip behind the city skyline. The glass windows reflected the light like gold. Evie stepped out, locked the door behind her, and stood for a moment watching the glow fade. For the first time, she didn't feel like the forgotten daughter or the background character in her own life. She was the author now, the designer of her destiny. As the last ray of sunlight touched her car's window, Evie smiled, a quiet, peaceful smile, and whispered to herself, "They couldn't destroy me." Do you think Evie made the right choice by cutting ties and finding peace on her own? Or should she have given her family another chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy emotional stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss one.